Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of RE044, where I take old stories that I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. I hope that you enjoy. Post-Emptive Strike, written by Communistred. Okay, class, that is it for this chapter. The section exam will be held during our second lecture hour next week, so be prepared. Come see me during office hours if you have any questions. We've got a little time left, so I'm going to close off this chapter with a little anecdote that I enjoy telling, even though it is pretty horrifying. It's a useful transition to the next period of history we'll be looking at. It won't be on the exam, so no need to take notes. It's about the humans of home planet Earth. No, I don't expect that you've heard of them. That's not many of them around these days. At the end of the Third Galactic Era, the humans had recently joined the Galactic Council as a sub-member. They had barely achieved faster-than-light travel and had a couple of extrasolar colonies, fairly standard for a new Class 3 culture. Unfortunately, they were right at the edge of the Eustachian space. The Eustachian Empire was in an ascendancy at the time, becoming a major player in the galactic scene, as we have seen happen time and time again throughout the Third Era to such communities. The Eustachian Empire saw their potential as cheap labor, free real estate, and resources to pillage. They drummed up a couple of false, exaggerated charges of encroachment on their territory, and began making moves for war. The humans, of course, begged for intercession from the council, which was ignored as usual. I won't go into details about the human Eustachian War, as it went exactly how you would expect. A mere 13 hours after declaring war on Earth, the humans had capitulated. Most of their defense systems hadn't even been able to engage the Eustachian fleet, and those that did were simply unmade. 60% of humanity were dead, incapacitated, or directly enslaved as a result of the war, and the remainder dispersed throughout the galaxy, or lived as subspecies on their own worlds. Life went on. But 1 year later, a dead zone, that is, a region of space that cannot be passed through, was recorded near Earth by several merchant corporations. Those crop up commonly as a result of space debris, pirates, space-time anomalies, and so on. So no one paid it any mind except to avoid it. Gradually, it moved away from Earth and towards the Statia Prime, until 184 years after the Earth had been defeated, with an unusually persistent dead zone gradually becoming more of a nuisance and entering their solar system. Statia finally investigated the root cause of this dead zone. It left them just 7 hours to evacuate the planet before the first projectiles struck. Hundreds of thousands of steel rods accelerated to a considerable fraction of the speed of light, pulverized the surface of Statia. First one side, then, as the planet turned, the other. The bombardment was particularly fierce for 13 hours, then regular for the next 3 days, but they continued to fall for some time afterwards, with the last known projectile striking some 3 weeks after the very first. The rods ranged from being roughly my size at the small end to the size of a large tree. Some of the inhabitants managed to escape the planet, and a large percentage of the rest had managed to find shelter in underground bunkers. Nonetheless, analysts believe that a good third of the population of Statia was still on the surface. So few of these survived that the number could be considered a rounding error. Those that had made it to a shelter underground fared better, but it is estimated that nearly half the bunkers were compromised, and at least some inside were wounded or killed. Galactic aid was on the scene within a few hours, but was forced to wait for the bombardment to subside. When the first 8 ships landed, they had to dig desperately through what has since been called the 4 layers of Astasia. Meters of dust, steel, concrete, and corpses, to try and find and rescue those still trapped inside the bunkers. Many bunkers were found, and the survivors taken to safety. Others were lost under the debris and only found months or even years later. I'll leave it to your imagination what happened to those who sought shelter inside them. Only half the population of Astasia survived the catastrophe. Obviously, investigations into who had fired the projectiles began and found that they had originated from human space 184 years ago. The humans used railguns on their fleet and orbital defense, which accelerated mass to significant speeds. Somehow, these projectiles had been modified to be less detectable. They had calculated where Astasia Prime would be in the future with unnerving precision, fired their projectiles, and artificially accelerated them beyond speeds of typical kinetic warfare. It's believed that every single one of the human space-based railguns not actively engaged in a station fleet from the ships or platforms fired every projectile it could in 13 hours before human surrender. The result was what came to be known as the Steel Rains of Astasia. The Astasians demanded punishment and reparations, but there were few issues with that, largely because there was no one left to seek reparations from. The humans had effectively ceased to exist as an organized body after the war. In fact, by Astasian law, they were now part of the Astasian Empire, and therefore the Empire would have to pay their own reparation. They tried to hunt down the perpetrators, but none of the people who fired a shot or commanded one fired were alive to blame. What was shocking was that none of those who had been responsible had passed that knowledge on. Almost to a man, the remaining humans were as shocked as the rest of the galactic community. They had fired everything they had for 13 hours straight, and then simply never told a soul. Whether for revenge or just out of hopelessness, we'll never know. Finally, those humans who were still in leadership positions argued that this was as simply an act of an all-out war. The Astasians had started the war and threw everything they had at humanity. The humans had simply returned the favor as best they could. Who could blame them for taking so long for their weapons to hit their target? To cut a long story short, the Astasian Empire lost a lot of sway in the galactic community, and their ascendancy was cut short, never to rise again. Their peers saw them as essentially losing to a tiny backwater community, and they had more pity than respect in the Galactic Council for quite some time. But more importantly, this resonated deeply within species and planets that had suffered the same treatment as Earth. Across the galaxy, slaves and subjects began to fight for equality, autonomy, and rights from the great powers at the time. The Astasian incident had shown them that even in defeat, they could strike a blow to their oppressors. Slogans like "In death we conquer" often accompanied images of human skeleton wearing a crown or holding a flag, became common in these movements, and the end result was one of the most widespread and bloody revolutions in history, and the desolation and collapse of 3 of the 5 great galactic powers of the time, eventually leading to the restructuring of the Galactic Council. Out of the bloody ashes of Astasia came a significant set of reforms and the beginning of the 4th Galactic Era, generally regarded as the golden age of the galaxy, with significant improvements in equality and the average standard of living. So for those of you who are worried about your grades after the last dismal test results, I'd encourage you to be inspired by the humans who managed to win a war even 200 years after they had already lost it. There may be hope for you yet. Thank you. That'll be all. See you next week. End of story. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Bushmaster 177, Henry the Red, Caspar Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon WRE, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.